Greetings to all ant lovers on my channel. This is my first video on the English version of my channel, so welcome to our team. A year ago I visited Tanzanian rainforests, so I suggest to take a quick run through the animals that I brought to my collection from this trip. The first is the unfortunately dead spiny orb weaver spider, which I found in the forest on the way to the Matroni waterfall. For many years I dreamed to see these incredible spiders in real life, and when I found this specimen I couldn't resist the temptation to bring it to Ukraine. And yes, judging by the length of the spikes on his back, it was just a male. But despite the spacious biotop and well-built climate, the spider didn't live very long and died just a few days after arrival. Next on the list are Crematogaster ants, who will be the main characters of today's video, so I won't talk too much about them yet. Another interesting species in my collection is Campanotus. On the trip I saw a lot of these ants, and I was lucky to catch a few queens. As a result, I had 2 queens on my hands, one of which developed very well and the second one couldn't reach the larvae for a long time. In the first case, after about a month and a half, the first queen grew workers, and the second one only after 4 months. In some time, the queen which had problems with raising workers died, and the other, proudly coming out of the first generation, continued to run its business. Gradually the family grew stronger, the larvae grew, the ants got used to the food that I gave them, and I had more and more desire to film them, since I had big plans for these ants. I saw a lot of potential in this colony, and I waited for it to grow up to realize all my ideas for it. Over time the family grew a little bit, and I decided to move them to a small formicarium, where they lived for about months. It would seem that everything was going as well as possible, but after a short time the queen died for some unknown reason and left her workers orphans, which closed the blog about this species. Now that I have talked about all the Tanzanian animals, we can finally continue talking about Crematogaster ants. Enjoy watching! So, Crematogaster. In mid-March 2025 I brought 5 queens of an indeterminate type of cocktail ants. All the queens by the time were with good egg packages, and I was looking forward to the first generations, as it was assumed that the workers would help determine this type of these little ants, and I really hoped that this would be the Crematogaster that views carton nests, and you heard right, such Crematogasters really exist. Surprisingly, exactly 30 days later, the first queen had its first worker, followed immediately by the second. On the first day I fed the ants honey and gave half of Chinese beetle larvae, so that the queen would immediately begin to restore the forces that it had invested in its offspring for a month. A little more time passed and the colony got stronger, so we take them out and prepare them for a new meal. I decided to give this colony a slightly crushed but still alive Chinese beetle larvae, because these ants in nature constantly hunt other insects, and at home I tried to recreate conditions for them similar to real ones. So what you are seeing now is the first hunt of a small burgeoning ant empire. As expected, the ants immediately knew what to do with it, and dragged the worm closer to the brood to feed their every hungry larvae. New stage, Outworld. The colony was growing really fast, and I thought it was time to give them new territories. And my choice fell on such small cube, which is enough for the ants for the first time. I filled the arena with coconut chips and put a piece of bark to imitate the tree on which they would live in nature. Ready. And now it's time to show the ants that the world is not limited to one test tube. You already know the next steps very well. We insert one end of the tube into the test tube and the other into the arena. I note that I use a small diameter tube, and so they will be more comfortable. By the way, as you can see, I ended up refusing coconut chips, because I decided that such a small colony could simply move into it to life, and they would no longer be visible at all. Now we take the cotton wool out of the tube and observe how the ants walk outside their home for the first time. The workers settled in pretty quickly and were clearly looking for possible food sources, so I gave them a drop of honey that the ants definitely liked. As I said, Crematogasters really grow very quickly, and the number of broods has constantly increased. The volume of food required for them has become larger, and the colony has become stronger. I had never given a Crematogaster before, so this was a new experience for me. Of course, there is nothing particularly complicated in such ants, but it is always incredibly interesting to follow the behavior of new species. For the next 3 months I didn't film the ants, but during this time a lot of things had changed in their lives. As I said, I watched this colony with great interest every day. But it was even more interesting because I had only to determine their species. On the ant maps I found Tanzania, and near it is the island of Zanzibar, on which the queen was caught, so I looked at the list of species on this particular area. Now we are looking for the genus Crematogaster, and the fun begins. I need to Google each species and compare with my ants. In addition to ant maps, I used AntWiki and AntWeb, and as you might have guessed, I also had to Google every prescribed type of Crematogaster from them. Everything is simple here. We drive Latin into the search bar and view the photos. At the entrance of this lesson, I came across a species of Crematogaster chiarini. Like everyone else, I found it on the net and realized that most likely my work was completed. After looking at a few more scientific sites, it was clear that this was at least the most similar to my Crematogaster of all the Tanzanian types that I could find on the internet. And at the end of this article there was such a photo that gave me even more hope for the cotton nest of these ants. September 2021. A larger arena is already at the disposal of the colony. And if you look into a test tube, then you can't count the ants on your fingers. All the walls of the incubator are plastered with brood. The ant hill is full of life. Large workers have appeared with a slightly different head shape, so apparently these species have something like measures. The bottom of the front of the incubator are littered with a supply of crushed food. Now the Crematogaster colony shows itself from a completely different side. I haven't seen any panic in a very long time. These guys don't care what is happening around them, and I really like this behavior of ants. And in this frame you can see the modified abdomen of the queen, and as I later realized, this is due to a lack of moisture. But I noticed everything in time. So everything is still fine with the queen. The outworld is full of trash, a lot of empty skins of cockroaches and other insects. And by the way, these guys don't care about Australian PTFE fluon. I often see them calmly walking on it as if it doesn't exist, so I try not to forget to put lid back on. These ants never refuse food with fodder insects. They eat everything in a row. But even more they love sweets and keep large colonies of aphids in nature. By the way, I have one idea on this topic, but for now let it stay in trick. In addition to the lack of space in the incubator, the water also ran out, so it was time to relocate them, and just in time my friend prepared a very organic formicarium for them. Many thanks to my friend for helping with housing for this little thing. I always wanted some kind of cool wooden formicarium on the shelf and finally had a reason to get one. The link to his Instagram will be in the description, so if you want to evaluate his work, be sure to go to his profile. It was time to give the ants new spaces, and I immediately began the process of relocation. We disconnect the incubator from the arena, and now somehow we need to replace the tube with a longer one, and in the case of Crematogaster, this is of course another task. But I already have experience working with our kits, so there were no special problems with this. I hooked up everything and the most epic began. I had to transfer all the ants from the incubator to the arena. Of course I don't recommend you do this, but the test tube didn't fit in the arena, and what will happen to the impenetrable Crematogaster from one relocation. So let's get started. Somewhere half of the ants with brood safely slept, but damn it, there are still the same number runs around in a test tube, and now they had to be thrown at their leisure somehow by hand. Ants are arboreal, which means that they have very tenacious puffs. Somehow transplanted them all, didn't seem to kill anyone, all hands were in ants, but fortunately there was no use of a sting. Everything calmed down. Now you can look into the arena. Here of course the ants panicked a little, but in general they quickly figured out what to do. In some frames you can see the difference in the size of the ants and the reddish color of the abdomen, which is visible only in good light. The workers folded the brood into several main piles, and it looked very nice how the empty carcass of the superworm became their temporary home. Finally, the long-awaited move, although it lasted a long time, because these ants are such that they sit well in the arena, but with grief in half in the end, everyone moved to a new nest. Finally, we moved to the present. The ants once again updated the arena. Everything goes as usual, everything is quiet. Ants have long settled in a new place, and are only engaged in increasing their numbers. At the moment the chambers of the formicarium are empty. The Crematogaster ant preferred to sit in the tube. At the entrance to the ant hill there are always a lot of workers who control the situation in the arena. The tube is always full of ants, which is understandable, because they live in it. The ant turned out to be not at all as scary as some other Crematogaster species. Everything is calm in the arena, just do what you give them food. It's true that I don't like it, I still haven't waited for a cartoon about them. At the same time, as my friend, the same Crematogaster has already shown what he is capable of construction. But I think this is still ahead and you shouldn't worry. And at this moment I got a new lens for my camera, and now we can see what these small ants are doing there. For example, here a worker using his saliva softens a dry piece of honey taken from stalks. If you look closely, you can see that the abdomen of these ants is not at all black. It has such an orange color that looks different depending on the lighting. And the ants are really constantly busy with something even inside the ant hill. Only because their size we don't notice this. These ants, although small, requires a lot of food, especially other insects. It takes me about 5 Chalkman cockroaches a day for this colony. Ants quickly cut everything and take it to the ant hill to feed the larvae, which will soon become a replenishment of the colony. I'm sure you, like me, were interested in watching these ants, but it's time to finish the video. I want to remind you about my social networks, namely Telegram, Instagram, Facebook and others, links to which one will be in the description. Also, in connection with recent events, I want to support all the inhabitants of Ukraine in this difficult time for us. I always name my colonies myself, but this time I suggest you come up with a name for yourself and write it in the comments. I will choose the most interesting and voice in the next video about Crematogaster. Thank you for watching this video. Remember about the like, repost, comment, subscribe to the channel, it will only get more interesting. See you soon.